Stop complicating. Start simplifying. Lincoln's Masterclass in Message Clarity. Part 1. The Harsh School of Necessity. Why simplicity became Lincoln's superpower. The noise was deafening. Every pronouncement from Washington was met with a chorus of competing voices. Critics, allies, rivals, generals, citizens, all clamoring for attention, all convinced of their own complex solutions. In this cacophony, a slender, often awkward man with a high-pitched voice found his profound power, not in adding to the complexity, but in ruthlessly stripping it away. Abraham Lincoln didn't just understand simplicity, he was forged by it. His ability to simplify the message to its absolute core wasn't a choice of style. It was a skill born of necessity, honed in the crucible of his unique upbringing and early career. Forget the image of the eloquent orator born with a silver tongue. Lincoln grew up in an environment where verbose, convoluted language was not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive. Imagine a frontier cabin, a communal gathering around a fire, or a dusty courthouse in a nascent town. Communication had to be immediate, unambiguous, and practical. There was no time for rhetorical flourishes or academic jargon. If you couldn't explain something simply, it meant you didn't understand it well enough yourself, or worse, you were trying to deceive. This stark reality ingrained in Lincoln an almost visceral aversion to unnecessary complexity. His first unofficial training ground for clarity was the circuit court. As a young lawyer riding the 8th Judicial Circuit in Illinois, Lincoln encountered clients from all walks of life: farmers, small business owners, common folks. They spoke plainly, and they needed legal issues, often intricate and confusing, explained in terms of their everyday lives. A lawsuit about a boundary dispute wasn't about abstract legal concepts. It was about a farmer's livelihood, his land, his fence. Lincoln learned that to genuinely serve and win over a jury of common citizens, you couldn't speak at them. You had to speak to them in language they immediately grasped. He watched other lawyers drown juries in legalistic Latin and convoluted arguments, losing cases not because their facts were weak, but because their message was impenetrable. Lincoln, however, would patiently untangle the knots, representing the core issue in a few plain, relatable sentences. This discipline wasn't passive, it was active. Lincoln developed a unique habit of mentally stripping away layers of complexity until only the raw, undeniable truth remained. He'd hear a lengthy argument, often filled with digressions and irrelevant details, and his mind would instinctively begin to prune, to distill. This wasn't about being simplistic, it was about achieving ultimate clarity. He aimed for a kind of intellectual transparency, where the core idea was so starkly presented that it became self-evident. Consider the political landscape he entered. Debates were often long, rambling affairs, filled with oratorical contests and personal attacks. Lincoln observed that while such displays might entertain, they rarely persuaded or unified. The common person, tired after a day's labor, didn't want an intellectual puzzle. They wanted an answer, a direction. Lincoln recognized that to command attention, you first had to command understanding. His early speeches, though often overshadowed by later masterpieces, show this developing skill. He would pick one central point and hammer it home with relentless, unadorned logic. He wouldn't introduce 5 different sub-arguments. He would build one solid, unassailable case, brick by simple brick. This forced him to clarify his own thinking. First, if he couldn't explain it simply, he understood that he hadn't truly grasped the essence himself. This internal pressure for absolute clarity became a self-correcting mechanism, refining his arguments before they ever reached an audience. The ultimate test of this principle arrived with the nation's fragmentation. The issues surrounding slavery and states' rights were mind-bogglingly intricate, with legal precedents, economic implications, historical grievances, and profound moral dimensions all tangled together. Yet Lincoln consistently brought it back to a fundamental, unavoidable truth: the preservation of the Union. Every speech, every major decision, every public statement, no matter how complex the background, was ultimately distilled to this singular, essential objective. He didn't deny the complexity. He simply chose to frame it around an undeniable, simple imperative. This foundational commitment to stripping away unnecessary elements allowed Lincoln to cut through the noise. In a world saturated with information, even then, simplicity became his competitive advantage. Achieve universal understanding. His words resonated from the humblest citizen to the most educated statesman. Focus attention. By eliminating distractions, he directed his audience's minds to what truly mattered. Build unshakable conviction. When ideas are simple and clear, they are harder to deny and easier to embrace. Lincoln's journey into the power of simplification wasn't a discovery. It was a hard-won mastery, forged in the crucible of necessity. It became the superpower that allowed him to guide a bewildered nation, not by overwhelming them with complexity, but by illuminating the clearest path forward. This wasn't just about public speaking. It was about thinking, deciding, and leading with an unparalleled focus on the essential. Part 2. The power of everyday language and relatable imagery. Once Lincoln had mastered the discipline of stripping away the non-essential, his next step was to articulate that core truth in a way that resonated with everyone. This wasn't about using fancy words or complex sentences. It was about the profound art of employing everyday language and creating relatable imagery. He understood that the most powerful ideas weren't those cloaked in academic obscurity, but those painted in the colors of common experience. The language Lincoln spoke was the language of the common man, honed not in libraries, but in general, stores, on farm fields, and in the rough and tumble of frontier life. He instinctively avoided high-flown rhetoric and Latin phrases that were the hallmark of many politicians of his time. Instead, he favored the simple Anglo-Saxon words that formed the backbone of everyday conversation. This choice wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure his message landed directly, without requiring translation or intellectual effort from his audience. He knew that if you wanted to reach the minds of millions, you had to speak to them in the words they used to talk to their neighbors, to their children, to themselves. This preference for simplicity was vividly demonstrated in his legal practice. When arguing a case before a jury, Lincoln wouldn't cite obscure precedents or engage in convoluted legal theories. Instead, he would simplify the essence of the dispute, often by telling a story or using a folksy analogy that an ordinary farmer or laborer could immediately grasp. He famously summarized a complex property dispute by saying, "The fellow who owns the cow is the one who milks her." This wasn't a profound legal dictum, but it immediately cut to the core of the issue, making it understandable and intuitively fair to the common-sense jury. He wasn't just explaining. He was drawing a direct line from abstract law to lived experience. Beyond simple words, Lincoln was a master of relatable imagery and vivid metaphors. His mind was a vast repository of anecdotes, farm wisdom, and everyday observations that he deftly wove into his arguments. When discussing the immense difficulty of leadership during the war, he famously remarked, "I am like a man trying to shingle a roof in a high wind. I can't think of anything but the next nail." This wasn't a formal policy statement, but it perfectly conveyed the relentless, exhausting, moment-by-moment pressure he faced, allowing his listeners to feel the weight of his burden. It made a distant, powerful leader instantly human and relatable. Perhaps the most iconic example of this skill is found in his House Divided speech. The concept of a nation torn apart by the issue of slavery was incredibly complex, steeped in constitutional law, economic interests, and moral arguments. Yet Lincoln chose a simple, universally understood metaphor. "A house divided against itself cannot stand." This phrase, drawn from the Bible, was instantly recognizable to his largely Christian audience. It didn't require explanation. It evoked an immediate, visceral understanding of instability and inevitable collapse. He didn't just state a political problem. He painted a picture of unavoidable doom if the division persisted. This simple image became the defining framework for the entire national debate, transforming an abstract political theory into a stark, tangible warning. This technique allowed Lincoln to do more than just inform. It allowed him to connect emotionally and intellectually with vast audiences. When he spoke of swapping horses in the middle of a stream to explain the perils of changing generals during wartime, every farmer in his audience immediately understood the profound risk and the pragmatic necessity of finishing the job with the tools at hand. He didn't need to elaborate on military strategy. The simple image conveyed the entire tactical and political dilemma. The power of everyday language and relatable imagery also enabled Lincoln to deliver difficult truths without alienating his audience. His use of humor, often in the form of short, illustrative anecdotes, could disarm critics or make an uncomfortable point palatable. Instead of directly confronting someone, he might tell a short, humorous story that subtly highlighted the flaw in their argument or the absurdity of their position. This softened the blow while still delivering the clear message. This skill teaches us that effective communication isn't about demonstrating intellectual superiority. It's about building bridges of understanding. By consciously choosing simple, common words and by grounding our ideas in images and experiences that our audience can immediately relate to, we make our messages stick. We transform abstract concepts into tangible realities, allowing our listeners to not just hear our words, but to truly see and feel our meaning. This was Lincoln's genius, turning the profound into the plain and the complex into the compelling, ultimately empowering ordinary people to grasp extraordinary ideas. Part 3. The Art of Unambiguous Framing and Direct Questions. Once Lincoln had boiled down his message to its essential core and clothed it in relatable language, his next mastery lay in unambiguous framing and the strategic use of direct questions. He understood that clarity wasn't just about what you said, but how you positioned it, ensuring there was no room for misinterpretation, and often, no escape from the undeniable truth he presented. This was communication as a meticulously crafted, intellectual trap designed to reveal rather than obscure. Lincoln abhorred ambiguity in critical matters. He knew that vague statements led to confusion, dissent, and ultimately, inaction. In a nation grappling with its very identity, he understood the imperative for absolute precision in defining the stakes. He didn't waffle. He drew clear lines. This wasn't always popular, especially when the truth he presented was stark and uncomfortable, but it was profoundly effective in forcing a reckoning. His legal background once again provided the perfect training ground for this. In court, a lawyer wins by presenting an argument that leaves no reasonable doubt. Lincoln excelled at crafting questions that cornered a witness or opponent, not through aggressive badgering, but through a calm, methodical progression of logic. He would ask a series of seemingly simple questions, each one building on the last, until the only possible conclusion was the one he sought to highlight. This wasn't about trickery. It was about illuminating an inevitable truth that his opponent had tried to obscure. A classic example of his unambiguous framing is his consistent articulation of the Union's purpose during the Civil War. While many debated states' rights, constitutional interpretations, or economic implications, Lincoln repeatedly brought the debate back to the singular, clear purpose: the preservation of the Union. He didn't allow the myriad side issues to cloud this central objective. Every major address, every directive reiterated this core mission with unshakable clarity. He understood that if the purpose of the war became muddled, the will to fight would erode. His framing was a constant reminder of the fundamental why. This ability to frame the central issue in an undeniable way was powerfully demonstrated in his debates with Stephen A. Douglas, particularly leading up to the Freeport Doctrine. Douglas championed popular sovereignty, allowing territories to decide on slavery. Lincoln, however, understood the inherent contradiction between this concept and the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which held that Congress could not prohibit slavery in territories and enslaved people were property, not citizens. Lincoln's genius was in posing a single, direct, unavoidable question to Douglas during their Freeport debate. Can the people of a United States territory in any lawful way against the wish of any citizen of the United States, exclude slavery from its limits prior to the formation of a state constitution. This question was a masterstroke of unambiguous framing. It forced Douglas into an impossible choice. If Douglas said yes, he defied the Supreme Court, alienating Southern Democrats. If he said no, he betrayed his own principle of popular sovereignty, alienating his Northern supporters. Douglas chose to say yes, alienating the South, and ultimately fracturing the Democratic Party, paving Lincoln's path to the presidency. Lincoln didn't win by shouting. He won by crafting a question so precise and unambiguous that it exposed the logical flaw in his opponent's entire platform. He didn't just state his case. He forced his opponent to inadvertently state it for him, in a way that revealed their inherent weakness. This method of using direct questions to reveal truth extended beyond debates. When generals were hesitant or unclear in their reports, Lincoln would often send back short, pointed questions that cut through the fog of war. He demanded clarity, not just information. His questions were designed not to gather more data, but to force precision, commitment, and a clear understanding of what would be done. He understood that leadership in chaos often required extracting clear commitments from unclear situations. The art of unambiguous framing and direct questions allowed Lincoln to eliminate misinterpretation. He ensured his message was understood exactly as intended, leaving little room for doubt or evasion. Force a choice. By clearly defining the options, he pushed for decisive action rather than protracted indecision. Expose flaws. His precise questions could shine a light on logical inconsistencies or ethical compromises. Maintain control of the narrative. By clearly stating the what and the why, he kept the focus on his core objectives. This skill teaches us that true clarity in communication demands not just simplicity in words, but precision in purpose. It's about framing our arguments so clearly that their truth becomes undeniable, and asking questions so direct that they compel honest answers. In a world full of hedging and ambiguity, the ability to draw clear lines and ask sharp questions becomes a powerful tool for leadership, forcing clarity and driving action. Part 4. The power of purpose-driven conciseness and eloquent brevity. Having mastered simplicity, relatable language, and unambiguous framing, Abraham Lincoln's final crucial step in message clarity was the deliberate cultivation of purpose-driven conciseness and eloquent brevity. He understood that in times of crisis, every word counted. He wasn't just short for the sake of being short. He pruned his language with the precision of a surgeon, ensuring that every remaining word carried immense weight and served a singular, powerful purpose. In a political culture that valued long, bombastic speeches, Lincoln's short, impactful addresses were revolutionary. Other orators might speak for hours, aiming to overwhelm with volume. Lincoln aimed to penetrate with precision. He recognized that the human mind, especially under duress, could only absorb so much. To truly resonate and be remembered, a message had to be distilled to its absolute essence, delivered with the impact of a perfectly aimed arrow. His preparation for such conciseness was rigorous. Though his words often sounded simple and spontaneous, they were the result of painstaking thought, careful revision, and a deep understanding of his audience and his objectives. He didn't just talk, he crafted. He would often work on his most important speeches for days, sometimes weeks, distilling complex ideas into powerful, compact phrases. He knew that to achieve brevity without sacrificing depth, every word had to earn its place. He understood the profound difference between merely being short and being eloquently brief, where every chosen word resonates with meaning and purpose. The ultimate testament to this skill is, without doubt, the Gettysburg Address. In a mere 272 words, delivered in about 2 to 3 minutes, Lincoln did what other speakers failed to do in hours. He completely redefined the purpose of the Civil War, honored the fallen, and articulated a vision for the nation's future. He didn't list casualties or recount battle strategies. Instead, He stripped away all non-essentials and focused on the foundational ideals of liberty and equality, elevating the sacrifice to a higher purpose. Consider the precision of its opening. 87 years ago, instead of 87 years ago, he chose a phrase that immediately evoked a sense of solemnity and connection to biblical cadence, giving the address an immediate gravitas. Every sentence is packed with meaning, yet utterly simple. The world will. Little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. This single, concise sentence accomplished multiple goals. It acknowledged the fleeting nature of words, elevated the soldier's sacrifice, and issued a subtle challenge to the living to ensure their actions were not in vain. This mastery of eloquent brevity allowed Lincoln to cut through information overload. In a chaotic environment, short, powerful messages stand out and are remembered. Increase memorability. Concise and impactful phrases are easier to recall and quote, fostering a lasting legacy. Amplify emotional resonance. When every word is chosen with purpose, it creates a powerful cumulative effect. Demonstrate intellectual discipline. True conciseness requires deep thought and clarity, not just fewer words. This skill teaches us that true power in communication often lies not in how much we say, but in how profoundly we say it, with the fewest possible words. It's about the discipline of editing, refining, and choosing each word with deliberate purpose, ensuring that our message is not just heard, but deeply felt and remembered. Lincoln proved that brevity, when wielded with mastery, is not a limitation, but a megaphone for profound ideas, allowing a leader to shape a nation's destiny, one carefully chosen word at a time. Part 5. The cumulative effect. Simplicity is the cornerstone of trust and action. Having dissected Lincoln's individual techniques for message clarity, from his foundational commitment to simplifying complexity, his use of everyday language, his precise framing, and his eloquent brevity, we now arrive at the culmination, the cumulative effect of these skills. For Lincoln, simplicity wasn't just a communication tactic. It was the cornerstone upon which he built unparalleled trust, galvanized a divided nation, and ultimately achieved the impossible. His life is a living testament to how radical message clarity can transform leadership and inspire widespread action. Imagine the sheer volume of misinformation, propaganda, and conflicting narratives swirling around the Civil War. In such an environment, the ability to speak clearly, directly, and without pretense became a superpower. Lincoln didn't just present his case, he created an intellectual safe harbor for the American people amidst the storm. When he spoke, there was a sense of relief, a collective understanding that they were hearing the unvarnished truth, stripped of all obfuscation and political spin. This constant, unwavering clarity fostered a profound sense of trust. People might disagree with his decisions, but they rarely doubted his motives or the underlying purpose he articulated. This trust was vital because it allowed Lincoln to ask for extraordinary sacrifices. When he called for more troops, when he imposed difficult economic measures, when he announced the Emancipation Proclamation, a deeply controversial move, his ability to explain the why in simple, undeniable terms was paramount. He didn't need to resort to emotional manipulation or grandiloquent appeals. His words, simple yet profound, resonated because they were understood and, crucially, believed. He showed that clarity is the foundation of genuine influence. His simplification wasn't about dumbing down complex issues. It was about elevating understanding. By explaining the deepest moral and existential challenges of his time in plain language, he empowered every citizen to grasp the stakes. He democratized complex ideas, ensuring that the farmer in Illinois, the soldier in Virginia, and the businessman in Boston could all connect with the overarching purpose of the war. This shared understanding, built on clear communication, was a powerful force for unity in a fractured nation. The cumulative effect of Lincoln's masterclass in message clarity created unwavering conviction. When ideas are simple and clear, they become deeply held beliefs that are difficult to shake. Unified purpose. Shared understanding leads to collective action, even when individuals have different backgrounds or views. Resilience in crisis. Clear objectives and transparent communication provide stability when everything else is chaotic. Lasting legacy. Messages distilled to their essence endure through time, shaping future generations. Lincoln's approach offers a timeless blueprint for anyone seeking to lead, influence, or simply communicate more effectively in a world that often rewards complexity and obfuscation. His life teaches us to stop complicating, to abandon the jargon, the pretenses, the endless caveats, and the fear of being misunderstood. Instead, we must start simplifying by ruthlessly prioritizing what's essential, using language that connects, framing our messages with undeniable clarity, and speaking with purpose-driven conciseness. The profound lesson from Lincoln's masterclass is not just about what to say, but how to say it in a way that builds trust, inspires action, and leaves an indelible mark. It's about the courage to be clear, the discipline to be brief, and the wisdom to know that the most powerful words are often the simplest. In a world craving clarity, Lincoln's legacy reminds us that true influence begins when we make our message so utterly transparent it becomes impossible to ignore.